what we're going to be presenting today is actually a work that we have done together, Maria and I, but also with Annalinda De Rosa, who is another researcher of the Department of Design of Politecnico di Milano. What I'm going to be presenting is both important for practitioners and academics. So I'm going to try to address both of these kinds of people that I know that are listening to the presentation, because it's really looking at both. So it's trying to bridge academics with practitioner work and understand the relationships between these two, especially focusing on what you can see in the title, which is mapping design methods. So it's a specific design method we have focused on, which is the desktop walkthrough. So perhaps some of you have already used this tool. What we're going to be looking at is how the three of us have written together a paper that focuses on the desktop walkthrough, trying to understand also its role in designing spaces and services together. So when we have, for example, a space, and together with that space, especially if it's public space, for example, like a bank, and we need to design it together with a service. So how does the desktop walkthrough work within this framework, this context, let's say? So this is what the talk is going to be about. I'm going to divide it into two parts. The first part is mainly about us, trying to explain also how we came together and what are our backgrounds and how these backgrounds have merged in order to then talk about the desktop walkthrough from different perspectives. And then I'm going to have the second part in which I'm going to go deeper into the desktop walkthrough and try to identify all the different elements that we have put together in order to understand how it works inside this context of space design together with service design. So the first part, so where did we meet and why are we talking about design methods? And this part may seem, sometimes obvious, like explaining why you met someone, but in reality, it builds up the story that I'm going to be talking about. So first of all, who are we? So as we have just introduced ourselves, it's Maria Göransdotter from Umeå University, me, Valentina Auricchio, and Annalinda De Rosa, who you see in the middle. Unfortunately, she could not be here today, but she has totally participated in this presentation. So the three of us have been conducting completely different, let's say, trajectories in research. So Maria has been developing a PhD in transitional design histories. Annalinda De Rosa has also developed a PhD in spatial design and service design. And me, I have actually had a long, let's say, 10 years of practitioner work, and then I came to academics. And between practicing and coming to academics, I've been focusing on design methods, understanding how design thinking works within institutions, public administration, but mainly in companies with managers. And from there, then I took it forward in understanding, let's say, Italian design methods and how Italian design methods can enter a more international, let's say, context. So these are our three, let's say, areas in which we were working. And so Maria, let's say, was focusing very much also on her cultural background, which is in Sweden. And so understanding the design methods that were coming from Sweden. While I was at the same time teaching the history of design methods in Politecnico di Milano, and with my students, I was trying to map, this is just one of the many examples we had in class, map where we were coming from what schools, from what culture, from what, what is the background of our bachelor degree in order to understand the cultural background of our design methods. And then what happened is that while I was doing this, I started looking for papers that were working on trying to understand what were the cultural backgrounds of design methods, to understand where they were coming from, And I saw this paper written by Maria and Johan Redström. So Maria Göransdotter and Johan Redström wrote this paper for design issues in 2018. And I was attracted by it. And I wrote to Maria, I said, listen, I'm doing the same work, the same kind of work of understanding design methods, understanding their critical histography, but on the Italian context. So why don't we come together and see what we can do, let's say, what we can work, let's say, together. So that's where we met, and then we wrote a paper together, Maria and I, on mapping design methods and looking at the design histories. But what is important to say here is that we were not looking at understanding, you know, who invented this method as a first person, because this perhaps is not that interesting. I mean, it could be, but it's also difficult to trace where a method actually comes from the very beginning. But what we were trying to understand and to reflect on is how it is important to know in what context methods evolve. And this is important in order to then apply it to our context. So we were trying to understand how we have books, for example, on design history. We have books that talk about, you know, who are the designers and what kind of products we are developing and what kind of services we are developing, but we do not have books on the history of design methods. So it's as if, you know, in another discipline, you know what has been produced, but you have, you know, no track of how the processes have developed. So we do have many books, tools, and online. We have toolkits and toolboxes. We have many that explain it, but then very few that bring together all this information. So we have started this kind of work, this kind of reflection together with Maria, writing papers and trying to understand, you know, what does it mean to map design with respect to other disciplines? What about the approaches, you know, the mindset? So if I have a participative approach, or I have you know, a co-design approach, or what kind of culture is behind and philosophies are behind what I do. The method, mapping the methodology, so the processes, the strategies, how we represent the design process in cycles, linearly, where is the iterative part? And then mapping the methods, so understanding from which discipline they're coming, what are their aims, their outputs, and more recently, another aspect that is really important is how do we measure their effect, their impact on what we're doing, and the same for the tools. So Maria, that's the story, let's say, of Maria and I coming together. And in the meantime, Anna Linda has been working on this Creative Europe project, which is called SMOTIES, Creative Works in Small and Remote Places. And it's focused on developing creative works within public spaces in cities, remote towns, villages. So places that are very far from a city and where it takes approximately more than 40 minutes to reach a city. So we're talking about remote areas in Europe. So it's 10 partners that are working on this project. And while we were working on this project together with Anna Linda, we actually used the desktop walkthrough very much in trying to allow also the citizens to participate within the creative process of spaces, in public spaces in their remote areas. So this is to say that, again, at the end, let's say, we wrote a chapter that is called Experimental Ways of Mapping, Revisiting the Desktop Walkthrough. Very recently, it's an open access chapter, so you can also download it. In this chapter, we tried to bring together all these reflections. So understanding design methods, where they're coming from, the culture they're coming from, understand how they have evolved in time, how they adapt to different contexts, and then bringing it down to, okay, how do I use the desktop walkthrough when I'm designing a space and a service together? So bringing this reflection of the desktop walkthrough within space design as well. Just to give you a small glimpse of what I'm going to be talking about, let's say there's a jump, there has been a jump between, how we were teaching design in the past. This is La Scuola Politecnica de Design in 1970. And how we teach design today, and how practitioners actually do design today. So all this reflection on design methods is important because our discipline evolves, as all disciplines. I mean, if we were, medicating people with the same medicines or ways of medication of the past, then perhaps there's no evolving also in medicine. And the same is for any discipline. So in design, again, we have different methods. Design has evolved. It changes with while the world is changing and the challenges change. So before we're not talking about service design before the 90s, and now service design is very present. So obviously our methods and our tools have to change and adapt. But in order to do this, we need to also know where they're coming from. So just to give a glimpse of this change, here this is a class of 1970, and then in the next slide I'm going to show a video of how in the Smoothies project that I just explained before, we have asked the students to actually interact with citizens in a remote place in Italy called Albugnano, using the desktop walkthrough. So just to introduce the topic, I'll show you this short video. Okay, so in this video that we just saw, as you probably have grasped, the tools are several. So there's a combination of the desktop walkthrough that then communicates, interacts with other tools of investigation. And it's a prototyping tool. It's a tool that the students have used in order to create an interaction with the people and generate ideas to test their assumptions. So basically what they did is they had a physical representation of a space, of a public space, and then they asked the people to tell them, what kind of activities would you like to see there? What kind of activities would you like to do in this public space? And also position yourself. So they had different ways of interacting with people. People were able to imagine themselves in this public space and imagine the activities that they wanted to have there. And this allowed the students then to choose among the activities to then design the public space in order to respond to this co-design, let's say, workshop. So this is the topic that we are going to be presenting today. Just to conclude, let's say, to finish the first part of this presentation, we are also now stepping forward in this reflection on design methods and understanding what design methods could be and how the design discipline changes according to how our methods change. And we have proposed a panel also for this conference that will be held in Milano in October, together with other colleagues that are also addressing this topic. So the topic of design methods and how design methods need to be, investigated and also criticized is not new in the design discipline. So already in the first debates on design methods, there was already people were aware of the fact that you could not become a better designer by just applying a method blindly. Blindly means without knowing how to change it according to the context in which you're designing. Blindly means also not knowing how to be iterative within the use of the method. So the fact that you can't just fill in a form and that's how it works. So this discussion that we are bringing forward is not new to the design discipline. And an example that we give inside the chapter that we have published is about, for example, the cultural probes tool. So there has been a big debate on cultural probes, on where they came from, when they came out, when they emerged within the design discipline, and from what other disciplines the reflections were coming from. So we just described how the first ideators, let's say, of the cultural probe were looking at the situationists, for example. So this group of artists that were mainly based in Paris that were actually developing these psychogeographical maps. And from there, the inspiration was to actually do this also in design and use these psychogeographical maps in design in order to understand, the context in which we were designing, an urban context. So that's where the cultural probes come from. So the cultural probes are a way, to collect clues about people's lives in a certain situation. So they are toolboxes, let's say, that you design for the context in which you're designing. What happened is, however, that these the application of cultural probes, if you look on the internet, you find many kinds of applications in different contexts, and which is on one hand precious and very good. So the fact that each toolbox is designed according to what context I'm working in, and also what kind of results I need in order to go forward. But however, what has been criticized as well, and this is another example, I've left a few examples, but I mean, if we look on the internet, we will find many more. And what are they, basically, for who has never seen a cultural probe and is listening to this presentation? It's a kit that you prepare and you give to people that live in a certain situation, usually a physical urban context or suburban context, in any case, a village, a place where people live. And you ask the people to take track of moments in their life, to take photographs of places that they visit or they live in, and to take track of what they do there and how they experience the place and so on. So this is what the cultural probe usually is, and according to different contexts, then it has been applied in many different ways. However, the discussion was that more and more, the cultural probe has lost this experimental and subversive nature of the method. So the subversive nature of the artists that inspired the method. This is important to know. I mean, it's not that the method is not valid if it's applied in a different way, but it's important to know where its origins came from in order to be able to also apply it again in this way, or to allow it to evolve in time if we need to be subversive or experimental in a different way in understanding a place and the people that live in that place. So it has been very much criticized also by other scholars how this design method has not been understood and applied in the right way. So this is an example of how through different papers the cultural probe has been presented to the community, used by practitioners, criticized by, again, other scholars, and how it's been used, and again, bringing back the history or the origins, the cultural origins of it, in order to then evolve. So that's sort of an example that we have applied then again to the desktop walkthrough. So trying to understand who has written about the desktop walkthrough in the past, who are the practitioners that are using it, in what context they're using it, in order to reposition it, bring it into the world of spatial design and service design, because the desktop walkthrough did not emerge like specifically in the context of designing spaces and services together. So what is the desktop walkthrough? The desktop walkthrough is a prototyping tool, and it is a tool that has emerged in designing services. So not in designing products, but in designing services. And usually it's a 3D model, and it sometimes it can use Lego figures, but we will get to this in a minute. So why is it using Lego figures and not other kind of figures? So the aim of it is actually to prototype a service, so a sequence of events. So in this is service design doing. This method is very well described. You can find it also online or in the book. It's defined as a signature method of service design, and the aim is not really to represent the space in a perfect way. So it doesn't have to be exactly the space or that I'm designing. It can also be a metaphor of the space, or it can be a small scale, a different scale of the space. The important thing is how I experience playing with the space, so how I experience as actors within the space. So this is the step-by-step experience of the service within the space. So the space represents more the acting of different actors within the space, and not so much like the physical, the reality, the real scale of the space. So an example here, this is a neighborhood. As you can see, obviously the road is not exactly the road that is in this neighborhood, but it's a let's say it's a representation of the road. And also the different boxes are obviously not positioned perfectly where they are positioned in real life, in real space. However, you have different elements, you have actors, and it represents the sequence, let's say, of where the actors need to move from one place to the other. And then there is an acting moment, a performance, in which I move physically in this space with the actors, explaining how the service works. So it can also be, the desktop walkthrough, a participative tool. And in particular, this is where the Lego Serious Play work can come in. So in particular, there has been an interesting research within companies with managers and organizations. And the aim of Ross and Victor was to help managers build a strategy together, understanding better what are the different components that need to be taken into consideration in order to build a strategy. And so here comes in Lego Serious Play. So also in Lego Serious Play, they used Legos, so elements of Lego, in order to help the managers to interpret what they were interested in what they were envisioning. In this case, in Lego Serious Play, it's not only about the desktop walkthrough, it's not only about representing a space, but they use Lego Serious Play also to represent metaphorically a solution. It can be a product solution, it can be a business solution of different kinds. Inside also Lego Serious Play, there has been an interesting research on the use of metaphors, storytelling, and sense-making tools in this process. And it is used also as a generative prototyping method. Generative prototyping methods means that it's a method that tests my ideas in a generative manner, so to generate new ideas together with in a participative manner, so together with other people. So if you are interested in understanding more about this tool, I'll just quickly show you this video, which you find online, but the document on the left is downloadable and also describes very deeply how where this tool comes from.
Lego Serious Play is an innovative method designed to improve business performance. It encourages group discussion, knowledge sharing, problem solving, and decision making through creative play. In a workshop, each person builds their own creation to symbolize their thoughts and opinions about a subject in question. Using Lego bricks as visual metaphors, each and every person is able to contribute by sharing the meaning of their creation through story making, regardless of position, cultural background, or language they speak. As the questions probe deeper, hands become the search engines for the subconscious brain, tapping into the creative minds. Lego Serious Play is a method that provides a safe way to have a free and honest exchange of opinion. The focus is on the bricks and their meaning, not on the people, so there's no fear of treading on personal feelings. Real issues are addressed. Everyone can contribute to the discussion and to the decision, resulting in an outcome everyone can live with and commit to. Participants come away with skills to communicate more effectively, to engage their imaginations more readily, and to approach their work with increased confidence, commitment, and insight. Lego Serious Play requires a trained facilitator, with workshops bookable from 3 hours up to 3 days.
Okay, so it's important to say how the use of Legos in this process from the ideators of Lego Serious Play actually came into place because they were working for Lego. That's at a certain point they developed this method, which was its aim was to organize, to help managers reorganize their company or think of new ideas for their company and envision possibilities. And then as a client, they had Lego. And so this is where the Legos came in. But the method itself actually has a deep research behind it. So these different components, you know, the desktop walkthrough being a prototype, being a generative tool, and also the idea of bringing in the theories behind Lego Serious Play are all components that have then been used by practitioners in different ways. Perhaps in some cases more, let's say, knowledgeable people, knowing exactly how where these tools come from and readapting them. But in other cases, perhaps mixing these elements without knowing that they are also coming from different cultures and different reasonings. So today, let's say the desktop walkthrough has different features. It has been used in different contexts by practitioners, also used very much in education. What are the distinctive features of the desktop walkthrough? So it's an idea generation, it supports idea generation, and it supports idea representation. For sure, it allows iterative analysis. This means that, you know, I designed something, I designed the tool, it's a prototype, and it's a prototype that allows me to check, to test my ideas, and then I fix it again, and then I test it again. So iterative, I test and test and test over and over. It allows me to envision possibilities within a context. And obviously, it allows me to test behavioral hypotheses. So behaviors can be tested of people within the context. As I said, it's a validation tool. It's a physical representation. We said this. And also it combines different actors and performs different actions. So another example of this is this kind of representation where we have a space, but it's not the real city. There are different elements of the service that are in between, that are represented by boxes. So it's a representation of what are the different touch points of the service. So I need to understand which are the touch points, which are the people, the actors of the service, and how then the person acts differently according to their role within the story. It can be a generative, as we said, tool. So not only it visualizes something, but it can also be used in a participative manner with people in order to generate ideas together. So it's a tool for inquiry. Sometimes it also represents the complexity. Let's say it allows designers to share the complexity of their solution with people in order for them to understand it. Because if we show our idea, perhaps through customer journey maps or through system maps, this is very complex for a person to understand what we are talking about, while the desktop walkthrough combines all these together in one representation and allows people to actually participate within that representation and to embody the experience. And by embodying the experience, they are able to actually understand what works and what doesn't work, and they are able to give us feedback on what they think could be the solution. So it's, let's say, we tangibilize, we say, the service performance, and allow a wider interpretation and understanding of our service. So an example here, that we can also have this kind of representation where it's printed out in a simple manner, but it also combines some kind of tools like the Wizard of Oz tool. So I simulate, let's say, an app, for example, or I simulate something that happens on my phone, and at the same time this interacts with my space, with what is happening in the space, and I allow people to actually live this, let's say, through step by step. So together with the desktop walkthrough, it's really important to say that obviously within service design, we need to, before developing the desktop walkthrough itself, we need to have develop different tools of design of the service which perhaps we already know. So for example, there's a temporal dimension where we need to have developed storyboards, journey maps, so understand the chronological sequence of what we need to represent. There's a human dimension, so I have to understand who are my actors, who are my stakeholders maybe, or the personas, as is another tool that we all well know. So highlight and understand who are the actors that are going to be inside this desktop walkthrough. And then there's a social dimension, so how the system works, so showing the actors involved, how they interact, how they meet within the service, and obviously then the information flow, and perhaps there's a physical flow of products or of other services, and so understanding the different interactions, let's say, between the actors and the physical space. So here is another example. So as you can see, again, it's not a real representation, but in this case, it's a metaphor of the place of the interaction. So only the main elements are put here because I need to allow people to understand which are the main touch points and how the service is acting between these main touch points. So the aim of the desktop walkthrough is to bring to life, let's say, a situation to life, the important part is actually to play, to So it's not only a representation at the end of the design process, which sometimes people think it is. So I design something, I design a service, I design a situation, I have all my customer journey maps and personas and so on, all the storyboards, and then I have this final representation as a perfect model of what is happening. In reality, this tool is very useful if it's made with very simple artifacts. So for example, in this example that you see on the side, there's post-its on a map. So it's used to actually, for the designers to understand the critical aspects of the service that they have imagined, and also to allow the real actors that will be living that situation to also understand which are the critical aspects. So here, for example, another very quick representation where, we just have boxes and we don't have roads, we don't have connections, but we do have the pre-service, the during the service and after the service. So it's more a customer journey map made in 3D, which is also an interesting way of interpreting the desktop walkthrough. So I have a customer journey map, I have a pre-service, a service, and a post-service, and then I position the different touch points and the interaction between people. Instead of, compiling an Excel file with all the wording, I actually bring it to life. So this is another way of interpreting the desktop walkthrough. Okay, so how do I proceed, let's say, in making the desktop walkthrough? So as I said before, I have to have a first idea of, I have to have a storyboard, as you can see in this image. I have to have the persona, so the people, the actors that need to be there. I have to have identified some touch points. Perhaps I have a detailed map of the space, as you can see here in this image, of the space where these people are going to be working or interacting. So there's a physical representation, a real in scale physical representation of this space. And then I can bring it to life. So I have all these elements, I've designed them, I've identified the needs, the problems. Perhaps I've done some other research before doing this. So I'm at the prototyping phase. I'm in the prototyping phase of whatever process you imagine, so the double diamond or so on. So in the prototyping phase, I choose to prototype this, perhaps a specific critical part of my story. So perhaps I don't have to prototype every single element. Perhaps I choose a specific time span of this story. But this time span, and this is the second point, has to be at least as complex as possible. So it has to involve multiple actors. It has to have interaction between these actors, and so multiple also touch points in order for me to actually test it. And then obviously then I have to build the narration. So what is the narrative? What are the different sequential and spatial parts that I'm going to be representing in the desktop walkthrough? So I have to choose among the ones that are represented here, which are the main elements that I want to prototype. So it's very important to say that the desktop walkthrough can be applied in different with different approaches. As you saw, so there's ways to apply the desktop walkthrough as a designer in a design situation with my colleagues. So I actually don't involve actors, external actors, but I prototype in-house. But there's also a way to use the desktop walkthrough as a prototyping tool, as a generative tool, as a participative tool. And this can be as you can see here in the scheme, so involving user in some phases, so only in the prototyping phase, as the students did in the video that I showed before. Or I can actually generate the desktop walkthrough with people. So I can create a workshop in which, I generate this desktop walkthrough together with people that are going to be, so with for example, if I'm working within again a bank, and I need to reorganize the spaces of this bank and how people are going to be working and delivering services within the bank, I can actually create a workshop and use the desktop walkthrough as the tool that needs to be generated and acted through role playing, for example. These are some other examples that I want to share that were developed again with the students in the Smoties project. So as you can see, there are different elements that are used in this in this prototyping tool. So we do have the desktop walkthrough, which is the maquette, in which we actually show physically the space in order for people to understand where they are. But there's also other elements, other tools that we are using here in order to collect, like a survey, in order to collect ideas from people, a notepad in which people can actually put down their skills and their intentions and their activities. There's a poster that represents what the prototype is about. So these objects are sometimes called, also defined by scholars, as boundary objects. The boundary objects are objects that allow us to prototype an idea. So then there is a moment of performance. So here again, we see how these tools are then used in order to interact with people and to understand what could be the best solution. So in this case, we're not generating the desktop walkthrough with people, but we are actually bringing already some ideas that we might have developed thanks to research. The students had gone to this place, to this rural place, which they had no idea about. So they're not living in this place. They went physically. It's from Milano. It's an hour drive. So they went to this place, they photographed the public spaces, they interviewed people, they did all the research, the desk research and the field research beforehand. Then they developed some ideas. Once they've developed some ideas, some possibilities, opportunities, understood the problem, they developed this boundary object. So a combination of desktop walkthrough and other elements for surveys. And then they went to the place in order to see if their assumptions, their ideas are the ones that best match what the people are looking for. So it's not, let's say, a generative workshop in which we designed the desktop walkthrough with the people, but it's more a prototyping tool where we co-design, let's say, using it as a prototype. So here, another example, as you can see in this example, you actually have, here they were designing in a physical space. It's a public space, but it's inside a building, a historical building. And they were rethinking this historical building in order to understand what kind of activities could be useful for the community to enact within this building. And and so they had three maps of three areas, let's say, of the building in which they wanted to understand what people were imagining there, what kind of activities, and they interviewed people, asking them to position themselves in this space and to say exactly what kind of activity they were envisioning there. And this is a closer lookup of this space. So what kind of services, what kind of touch points, each one of these little elements is a touch point. So they imagine different possible touch points of a service in order to understand which are the touch points that people are less interested in having. So are they interested in having a space to put their bikes, or are they interested instead of having a space where they want to share eating, or and so on. So some were put aside, some people were not interested. And so how did this actually work in the prototyping phase? Each person would position, let's say, their story within these spaces, and the students would took a photograph of each person's preferences, and then at the end they clustered all these different, representations of the spaces and activities and touch points that could be there, and they came to a synthesis in order to propose a final project. Okay, I would like, since we started a bit earlier, just to show another video of an example of this kind of activity in this space, and then we can open up also to maybe a debate. I'll just show this last video. Okay, so I would like to perhaps stop sharing a minute and interact a bit with the people that are here in order to understand if perhaps someone has, maybe leave also the word to Maria if you want to add something, Maria, to what I just said. And then there's, yeah, some final indications on the slides, but I would like to open a debate first.
I can jump in while people are reflecting a bit and thinking about what they want to ask or comment or bring. But I think that the last video that you included, Valentina, was really nice because it also shows that, I mean, ultimately what we're trying to do in design is to propose things together. I mean, it's about people. It's so easy to think that design is about the product that you're making, but you're always making it for someone, for, you know, building relationships or making situations different than they are. I think looking at, you know, where we started and what we often come back to in our discussions, thinking about where design methods come from or how they are applied, you know, with the kind of, you quoted it, we quoted Alexander about using methods blindly, then if the focus is all on the method or all on the tool, you lose sight of people. So you lose sight of why are we doing things and what is it that needs to keep on changing to be able to speak to evolving situations and evolving design practices.
Exactly, yes.
We'll remove the spotlight here so we can see each other and see if we have some hands up. And I see that Gerolf has his hands up. So please, Gerolf.
First of all, thank you for a very great presentation. That was really inspirational and very well condensed message overall. I was thinking about the spatial dimension. It's obviously very much used for urban design sessions, and you also have some sort of smaller settings with offices, etc. But when you talked about Lego, you also mentioned metaphorical usages. Could you expand on, or are there more of that kind, or is it sort of perhaps leaving the field for desktop walkthroughs, the metaphorical approaches?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think in design methods, among the design methods, the metaphors are very powerful, especially to imagine worlds that we don't see yet. No? So the ability to actually create a metaphor that then guides the design can be very powerful. However, it can also be very difficult sometimes, and one needs to step back from the physical place in order to imagine what is the metaphor of my project in order to then act in that space. This is something that let's say in a teaching context, it's very much used in interior design. In interior design, especially if I'm designing, for example, an exhibition, I usually always create some kind of metaphor of that space, of what I want, of the story I want to tell before I tell it. While maybe in urban design, I think great architects always have a metaphor in mind. But perhaps in urban design, what I see different in the methodology, but more and more we are merging, let's say, is that perhaps an urban designer tends to start from the geographical map, and it tends to not so much instead have a bottom-up process where I start from the people and then slowly, but this is an ongoing discussion, I think, also in urban design. So I don't want to enter that, but for sure it's interesting. No, how do I, for sure it's interesting to decide how I approach this, right? So do I want to start from how the space actually is, and then detach from it, create a metaphor and go back to the space, which is probably a process that is useful. And then so understand the people that live it, and then go back to the space. Have this conversation ongoing, for sure, between the metaphor and the real space.
Thanks. Really interesting.
And if I can build on that a bit, looking at also the how methods move, like how design methods, come in as a way of testing something at a certain point, and then sort of become established. I mean, the desktop walkthrough is very much a foundational sort of prototyping method in service design. But then looking, okay, so what happens then if this method comes into spatial design practices, where looking at how design and designing has come about over time. I mean, in spatial design, there has been very strong emphasis on the visual. You look at composition, you look at form, you look at foregrounding, backgrounding, but then bringing a method like the desktop walkthrough into that space, then you get into relationality, you get into the experience, the imaginary of what is this space going to be like, or what could it be like if you use an existing space and you bring the walkthrough, like we saw in some of these student projects. Then we almost go back to where some of these methods are born, like Valentina mentioned, the cultural probes coming out of almost a critique against something existing. How do we actually imagine something that we haven't thought actively before? So then I think bringing the desktop walkthrough, for example, into spatial design is about imagining differently and trying to also show what the methods that have been used so far, allow us to do, but also where they end. What is it that they can't do for us? So that's why, we're coming at this from the perspective of methods and methods development and questioning, okay, so what happens when we are stuck in a method or develop a method, or when it moves around? Because it allows us to do certain things and not others. And just that awareness, I think, is super important. It's not about saying, okay, this method is good, that one is bad, let's not use this, but just knowing, what can we do with them, and what can't we do with them? What do we need to then continue developing?
Yeah, I see another hand up. I wanted to build on what Maria just said, but I would leave it to a question and then come back
please.
to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just listening to this discussion, and thank you so much for the presentation. I'm just wondering, related to this, we just talked about how participating in this method changes people's relationship with their understanding or their projection of the space or the environment. I'm just wondering if you had done any work looking at how participating in this changed people's self-perception. Did people feel more of a designer because they had done this, or did they feel infantilized because it was Lego and that could be fun because it reminded them of being a kid? So I'm just wondering if there were, given we're talking about metaphors, if there were any sort of metaphors for how people's self-identity changed as part of this process. Did they feel more like a professional designer for doing something in 3D, or was it different different roles that came to the fore for this type of participation?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that allows me to also take it one step further. Really like this question. So one thing, when I spoke about like adapting a method to a context, and in particular a cultural context, this is really important. So for example, there are some contexts in which I cannot do it with Lego, because you find yourself in a very CEO, CFO level managing, where everybody's in black suit, and you bring in Lego. And somehow what happens there is, as what you just said, people feel like they either feel offended, okay, and they get angry and they're like, okay, or they go back to when they were children, and you don't get that serious play that you really want. So when I play as an adult to some kind of board game, I am seriously playing. I'm playing Monopoly. I am seriously playing. I'm not just pretending to be a little child and playing with colors. So sometimes in my practice, I've noticed that I need to, for example, eliminate colors and bring only black markers. Because in some cultural contexts, in other cultural contexts, this doesn't happen. Same CFO situation, but perhaps they have a different culture where the playfulness is accepted and they are able to bring it into developing real business solutions. So you want people to feel as if they are designers, right? You don't want to bring them back to kindergarten, because if that happens, then somehow it's not gonna develop ideas that are really actually doable. It might take them to situations where they're developing bizarre ideas, which are great, but perhaps really difficult to bring them back to the real life. So that's one point I think is really important. So what kind of tools do I use in these situations? What is the cultural reality, the people that I'm going to be interacting with, what kind of tools they feel comfortable with. So in some situations you need colors, in other situations you can't use Lego, and so on. And the other question was how they transform the people. I think one thing is for sure that they feel more involved, like they feel more there's somehow a work on their agency, their ability to actually improve their life, improve their situation wherever they are, if it's an organization. The problem, I think, there is that people are involved, and then perhaps whatever your project is doesn't get implemented, and there you have created a gap. So I think you do create a change in people. I don't know if they feel they become designers, but for sure you increase their agency. But then you have to act like that. It needs to be implemented somehow, even if it's a small piece of what you have developed with them needs to be implemented. Otherwise you create like some kind of illusion that things can change, but they don't. So maybe I added something to that.
No, it's great. Thank you very much.
And also building on that, I think then we can go back to the diagram that you showed in the presentation, Valentina. In what kind of design situation or what kind of context would a method like the desktop walkthrough be applied? So it's a very big difference if people are invited to give feedback on a service or a spatial development where they are just testing something. How does this work out for you? Yes or no, kind of thing, versus if it's used as a generative and imaginative or tool where the whole point is to open up for deliberation, contestation, multiple ideas about what could be. So then I guess also the experience of engaging is very different if you're an expert user just coming in evaluating something, or if you're invited to be a part of decision making on where this could go.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Maria. So deciding your methodology at the beginning of whatever project it is, if it's with a public administration or a private company, deciding the methodology. So is it co-design? Is it generative, tool workshops? To what extent am I allowing people to actually participate inside the process is important to define from the beginning in order to take it forward. And the other point, Maria, you talked about before was about the spatial design and the service design. I think I need to also add something there, since Annalinda is not here, unfortunately, and that's mainly her focus. So it seems obvious, perhaps, that these two should go together, since in all spaces we have services and vice versa. In all services, there must be people live in spaces. So we're not in the metaverse yet, thank God. In any case, also there, you will have to design spaces and services together. But somehow there's still a gap in practice. So there's, the architect is called, the interior designer is called to design the space, and there's not a service designer next to this design together. So somehow these two act differently, separately. So there's the service designer develops whatever services need to happen there, and the architect or interior designer is developing the space separately. And these two are not always, slowly they are merging, but that's what Anna Linda's work is about. So how do we bring these two together? How do the tools and methods that an interior designer and architect merge together with the service design tools? When do they come together? At what point of the process? And that's what this desktop walkthrough is, sort of that tool that merges these two together, that allows these two to talk to each other. Although in academics, we're still teaching in two different silos, but still.
But then looking at what how methods move between or even bring things together, then I mean, just what you just said, Valentina, is also part of challenging, historical definitions of where the boundaries or ditches are between various disciplines or let's say specializations, and what needs to change when we're thinking differently and doing differently. So then again, using this kind of method as a way not only to show this is how you could work generatively together with people who are going to be in a space, but it's also about changing design practice, changing how we perceive what it is designers do in what kinds of areas, with what kinds of expertise, and so on. So there's very much of that opening also through coming in, say, through a historical contemporary approach to what is it that methods do for us and what do they do to us in how we work.
I think we have two hands up, and let's start with Matilda.
Yeah, hi, and thank you for a great presentation. Really lovely to hear. But I was just curious also regarding the sort of space and the more service design-ish. I don't know if you've seen sort of, when you've used this desktop walkthrough, have the participant from the more service oriented or structure-oriented sort of practices reflected on that the room actually matter for the services?
You mean the space? If the space actually matters within the service? Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it's you have to, every time you use this tool, this method, you have to sort of understand first the space, like first, which are the boundaries of the space. And so it starts from the space, the reflection. So an analysis, the traditional analysis of a space is there at the beginning, right? So as you saw in some examples, you actually had the space draw, the official table with the boundaries of the space and the analysis of where I'm going to be positioning my service. So that for sure is the beginning, the start of the analysis. Then the desktop walkthrough can sort of be, as we said, a metaphorical exercise in order to understand, okay, I have this space, how do I move? But you can also have, there are some good examples, and this comes more, I would move it a bit to body storming. So you can actually be in the space. And this is more like, I would say that the desktop walkthrough was designed at the beginning in this way. So you are physically in the space and you experience in the space the service. This is how it was born. So this abstraction of the desktop walkthrough as a physical, 3D model where I move things around is a second step. The first step was, I am in a space. How do I move the actors? What kind of roles do I have? So for sure, your comment is very good to analyze, to look at where it comes from. So the first development was actually, okay, so we're physically here. Then what happened is that sometimes I can't be physically there. Sometimes the space is occupied by people. People are working in it. So I need an abstraction. I need some kind of physical model that allows me to imagine that space in a representation of it, because I can't act physically there. For example, I'm designing services within an airplane. It's very difficult as a designer to actually access and do a workshop inside an airplane. I mean, it's possible, but perhaps it's difficult. So instead of re-representing the whole airplane situation, perhaps I have 2 chairs, I can do a body storming, and next to it, I could have a desktop walkthrough, you know, that then shows the complexity of the relationship between the airplane and maybe the airport, and where these services start and end and so on.
Mm. Thanks. And the participants you said on, but do you see, and this is from my practice as well, I love body storming and sort of placing people in the spaces where you actually are. I think that also makes a difference. But just to hear a reflection from you, have you seen sort of, even with the desktop walkthrough, do you see that the participants are sort of understanding the space compared to then body storming? Or do you see sort of a different and emotional sort of attachment to the project and to the people moving around there if you do it like a desktop walkthrough compared to, yeah, rather being in a space, maybe not the space, but sort of doing a scenario based, more body storming way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think being in the space and acting, so role playing, is more effective from an emotional point of view. However, having an abstraction of the space allows you to imagine, be more imaginative and metaphorical. So I think the two have a different kind of effect on you as a designer or as a participant. So one is I emotionally feel more engaged if I'm in the real space, and I can role play in the real space and emotionally and understand the different obstacles. I think probably in the real space, I can really see the defects of my service, while the desktop walkthrough allows me to be more metaphorical. So to imagine possibilities that I hadn't imagined. While when I'm in the real space, I have more difficulty in activating this kind of imagination, because I'm physically there, you know, I'm especially for non-designers.
We have one hand up, and that might be the last hand for this session because the time is running out. But Fergus, do you have your, please tell your question or reflection?
Yeah, apologies. I feel like I'm taking a lot of space, but I'm so engaged with this, and it's very related to this discussion. I was thinking about the material aspect in this. So in, I guess, traditional, more material design practice, there would be that separation, the abstraction that you're talking about. You would have your functional prototypes, and then it would evolve to something that's more representative of the actual finished material artifact as the process develops. I'm super interested by that, how the material can constrain how easy it is to do that creative abstraction. And maybe this speaks to this kind of childlike state that you can become a teacher or a doctor without having to have a white coat if you adopt this complete creative, imaginary play type perspective. But I'm super interested in, very often, I guess, in my experience at least, the materials are the contents of the stationery cupboard, and then maybe some Lego or some other stuff we have lying around. So I'm super interested in how, either at different stages in the design process, we want to be forcing more extreme levels of creative abstraction or thinking in different ways, but also how often the materials we have available perhaps constrain. We build it this way because that's what the Lego affords us, or we've only got string and some wooden blocks. So somehow or other, the material is constraining the degree of creativity or helping form things. So I'm just wondering, like, how attentive we need to be in that as designers, but also if that's something you've explored, like in different ways, that how the actual materials that we're doing the mock-ups with are constraining our imagination or forcing people to have to be more creative or playful in order to transcend the limits of those materials.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't have, I think, an answer. I mean, I think it would be nice to experiment a bit more in that. Okay, the examples, I just want to say with respect to what I presented, the examples that I showed are of students that are in a course, in a master course. So this means that they have time and they're and they need to bring obviously something that is of high level. And sometimes when you are a practitioner, you don't have that time. You have a very restricted amount of time, and it's not so much about budget, it's more about time, I think. So because materials are low, it's not like huge cost. It's more about having the time to do something so perfect. So I think the best is to, when you're a practitioner, to work with easy materials, so as easy as possible. That's why Lego is easy, because you already have it. You know, you don't have to you don't have to develop the little people. So that it makes it more simple and fast. I think in practitioner world you need to be fast as well. So I think it's a matter of time, but it would be really interesting to go deeper into this and see if the material actually and the representation actually then influences how creative we are. It's not easy to answer.
I think we might be running out of time, but
yeah,
I have something I want to throw in here, because I think it's an excellent question, Fergus, and also like building on what Valentina said. I mean, if you do a comparison to sketching and visualization, for example, you know, we all know that the more refined and sort of worked through a concept sketch is, the less creative feedback you'll get from the people you show it to, versus if you do a quick draw on a napkin something. And I think, of course, the same thing goes here. I mean, if you're working, like you say, you know, with string and whatever wooden stuff you find in your cupboard, then you'll open up in a very different way than if you work with the kind of very refined things that we've seen in the examples shown in our presentation. And also if you work with Lego, I mean, just thinking about, you know, what does it mean that all people in a Lego set are all the same height with the same kind of body form, and no one's in a wheelchair, and no one, you know, and so on and so on. I mean, already when the more we refine the materials we work with in this kind of walkthrough, the more we steer our attention towards some things and not others. So again, looking at what kind of situation we want to create and open up for it, then it's, yes, super important to maybe sometimes just use, you know, whatever is lying around, rather than work something through very, very precisely.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think we can close with that.